There's a whole lot of reasons as to why racing is one of the most dominant sports of human history, with its simplicity and depth becoming one of our first competitive sports. As such, it shouldn't be really surprising to see racing injected as an activity even in places where it shouldn't be. And the same would go with video games as well. Despite having its own genre, racing as an activity is something that we wouldn't really be able to separate even from other video game genres. We can take our picks from fully fledged FPS, action RPGs, and every other genre under the sun. Some of the recent games I've played offline have gotten me interested in the idea of how racing is implemented in non-racing games, and that thought led to this video being made, leading us to our very first pick.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We got rubber to burn.
Cyberpunk, as an open-world RPG taking place in a hyper-futuristic setting, opens up the groundwork for a lot of racing-related content, with its abundance of cars from every range possible of economic shoeboxes, sedans, and hypercars of the future. The game itself had its driving physics and handling tweaked several times, but I'll simply focus on the vanilla 2.0 experience. Cars are separated even further by its drivetrains, with front-wheel drive being the floaty understeer cars, four-wheel drive being the grippy understeer cars, rear-wheel drive actually being able to turn or drift, and the occasional cool-looking bikes. For the most part, driving will be a major component of a Cyberpunk playthrough, but in terms of racing activity, there is one questline that will open up the Night City street racing scene. The Beast in Me is a questline revolving around Claire, the bartender of the Afterlife Club. The questline features several racing events, taking place all around Night City, whether it be the heart of the city itself, the sandy wilderness, or the industrial areas. There's only 4 races in total within the questline, but the developers were smart enough to give some breathing room for the players, with 3 out of 4 races allowing the players to bring their own ride. If players are not confident with their own ride though, the option to use Claire's Beast is available. Despite also having combat with co-drivers firing weapons on each other, the damage received is barely noticeable. It's extremely rare to have your own ride fall into critical health territory, and that's not counting the fact with how scripted the final race is due to it being more story focused, with choices made here determining what rewards you get at the end. After the quest is done, the option to replay the races are open, with an entry fee of $2,000 and a reward of $10,000 for finishing first. Without Claire though, there is no co-driver, so instead Johnny takes her place and commentates during the race. So despite having a lot of depth thanks to how many options there are, unfortunately the racing in Cyberpunk is mostly used in service for storytelling purposes, especially for Claire as a character. However, even though the racing in Cyberpunk may be disappointing, that doesn't close the idea of using the map of Night City for something along the lines of Gymkhana. In Update 2.0, the game added one new car for players to toy around with a completely different handling model, the Quadra Type 66 Hoon. As the name suggests, it's a tribute to Ken Block and is generally a very fun car to drive and drift around in Night City. Where else to go but with the GTA titles, some of the best-selling video games and media to grace our generation with its addictive run-and-gun action mixed in with some high-octane car chases in an open world to date. As the name suggests, Grand Theft Auto is a game mostly revolving around the idea of constantly stealing and driving cars to reach objectives, so it shouldn't be surprising to see them incorporate ideas around racing. For the sake of this video, I'll be covering the mainline games only and starting from the 3D era, with the first one being GTA 3, although there's only one activity within GTA 3, the mission called Turismo. It involves you racing through the areas of Portland. You can pick your ride of choice and that's pretty much it. It's a simple checkpoint-based event. It wouldn't be until the next title where racing gets a bit more of a spotlight. As of 1 year later, GTA Vice City introduces us to a number of events around racing, with street racing content and some indoor hot ring races. To gain access in the street races, however, Tommy needs to own the Sunshine Auto business, thus a sizable amount of the main story progression is required for this. Just like last time, you can bring your own ride of choice for these street races. Winning these races will always quadruple the money spent, so if an entry fee is $100, then winning will reward you with $400. Despite just 5 races taking place throughout the 2 islands of Vice City, it will serve as a challenge and require mastery of the terrain, handling, AI dodging, and physics of the game. Indoor hot ring races act in a very different way. Just like with the street racing, however, a sizable amount of progression is necessary to reach this content, as we need access to the stadium located on the far northwestern side of the map. Hot ring racing would be best described as something akin to a NASCAR race with demo derby mechanics, meaning car health becomes a resource players would have to manage alongside the very chaotic nature coming from both the AI and this narrow track. This is something that I can easily imagine would be either very fun for some or very annoying, especially those still not used to the AI and car physics. With 15 racers and 12 laps, this race becomes a test of will and endurance as players are forced to learn the peak of defensive driving. While there are pit stops for the mechanic of fixing cars, the time spent in them is generally not worth it. Alongside these races, there's still one more thing that could be considered as racing content. Up on the northeast side of Vice City, a minivan can be spotted containing an RC car. This will be a challenge due to the very unusual handling and the weird off-road terrain. It's not much, but it's certainly an improvement from GTA 3, and further improvement would be a given in the next title. The PlayStation 2's best-selling title, with its massive expanse and most importantly, better vehicle handling. Racing in GTA has never been better, and the massive map opens up to a lot of possible racing content, which luckily the developers have capitalized on. These races are introduced to the player as CJ first befriends Caesar, who later introduces CJ to the Los Santos racing scene, and would later be expanded with his meeting with Woozie in the Badlands area, with a surprise cameo from GTA 3's mute psycho Claude. Due to the separation of each major area, each of them now features its own set of street racing content marked on the map with the checkered flag icon. Although this time around, the game will provide the cars, which I suppose is a safeguard by the developers in case players can't manage to find a fast car on their own. With this, racing content in San Andreas unlocks proportionally to main story progression, with Los Santos being the earliest and Las Venturas being the furthest away. In terms of its difficulty, the biggest challenge will come from San Andreas' extreme environment diversity. These races will take you to the furthest areas of each map, from the bustling streets of San Fierro, Los Santos, and Las Venturas, with several stages of off-road racing above the Badlands and desert areas. With AI not being as much of a nuisance thanks to the reward car handling, each race rewards $10,000 with no entry fee required. The aerial races count towards this collection as well, so you better get used to the plane school, because at least it's worth the trouble. Winning all the races in the game rewards us with $1 million, so be prepared for some of the most unique environments and challenges for racing in a GTA game. But not so fast. The stadium races return from Vice City. While all three different race types were combined within a single stadium back then, this time around they are separated per major city. We're looking at the Los Santos Stadium race, which features the same hot ring event as in Vice City, with the difference mainly being the track design from the classic oval now replaced by an 8-shaped track. While the AI are certainly easier to deal with, the pit stop mechanic is no longer available and entry requires some level of driving skill. The rewards are quite interesting as the hot ring racer and a monster truck will now spawn outside of the stadium after completion. But that's not all. With the addition of even more features and vehicles such as swimming and bicycles, the game features one more activity which I'm pretty sure most GTA fans love. It's a long triathlon event involving swimming, cycling, and running, and sometimes sliding. But as side content, it's primarily useful to complement the new player attributes, rewarding players who keep their CJ healthy and strong with 10,000 and 20,000 for each activity. With all this said and done, GTA San Andreas is quite the beefcake of content, with how many side activities that are available, a much appreciated and better access to content with its quantity divided by different story progression markers, and the intricate use of its character stats tied to these side events, heavily improving and adding further from what the predecessors would achieve. So it's time we step away from the 3D era and into the HD era of GTA, with the grand return of Liberty City and featuring one of the best written GTA games to this day. However, I can't really revel in how gloriously written this game is because we're here for one thing, the thrill of racing. Due to the change in engine from the old renderware to the brand new Rage engine, GTA 4 would come with a massive overhaul of its physics engine, adding character ragdolls and a brand new vehicle handling model, having a more understeer and somewhat realistic style of driving. Perfect fit for a New York-inspired city with all of its narrow passages. As for its racing content, there's only the street racing scene again, separated into several races for each campaign. Starting with Nico, you'll need to call up Brucey and take on his mission before having access to race offers.
Come on, start you! Pure gold, eh, big man?
With 9 races all around the areas of Liberty City, and the amount of cars you get to drive in this game, the variety isn't exactly slacking. Unfortunately, vehicle customization takes a back seat as the feature from San Andreas is no longer present here, leaving only the pay and spray as the only form of vehicle customization. The biggest challenge is getting used to this new vehicle handling, especially due to GTA 4 having the more realistic approach out of all the GTA titles. 10 months later, the first DLC for GTA 4 drops, putting players in the leathery biker seat of Johnny Klebitz, who would, as expected, race around on bikes. Doesn't matter what kind of bike, whether it's the Chopper or a Faggio. Uniquely, the races here are designed with combat in mind. Hitting opponents enough will cause them to fall off their bikes, and they can launch you to the closest hospital too. These motorcycle races are unlocked once completing the mission Liberty City Choppers, which is fairly early in the game. There are 12 races in total, with the first one rewarding $500 and each subsequent win increasing the payout by $250. Winning every single race will also reward Johnny with a special bike at his safe house. Meanwhile, 8 months later, Luis and the Ballad of Gay Tony brings even more activity with its own weird twist to the triathlon formula, starting with a parachute jump, a boat race, and high-octane street racing with nitrous to top it all off. The biggest challenge of these games, however, will still come down to maneuvering the roads and traffic of Liberty City, as car damage is far more impactful with the new handling rework. The reward for this activity is a flat $1,000, which can be repeated as many times as possible. Granted, GTA 4, even with its DLCs, doesn't really offer that much racing content, and it's understandable as the new handling made to fit with the map design isn't particularly something that is well suited for high-speed racing, which is most likely the reason why the handling would go over another massive rework for the follow-up. The best-selling piece of media ever made in the history of mankind. The game has managed to sell more copies than any other game, novel, or movie. Being the game to introduce multiple switchable protagonists, yet another change in driving physics, and special powers, it wouldn't be surprising to see even more quantity when it comes to racing content. With the grand return of car customization and introduction of the perfect start and slipstream mechanics. The earliest content itself is available whenever Franklin finishes one of his Stranger and Freaks mini-missions from HAL. With protagonists now having their own vehicles, it made racing content significantly easier, as players could just boost Franklin's own car for both its power and ease of access with cash as the primary reward. Despite the map size, these street races themselves only take place within the boundaries of Los Santos or the southern half of the map. This is where off-road races come in, as they are available once the mission Mr. Phillips is completed, taking place all around the northern side of the map. Unlike HAL's races, every protagonist can run these races and be rewarded with a Moto X suit. Additionally, there are some sea races using the Sea Shark scattered all around the maps, and triathlon races similar to the one in GTA San Andreas, which require swimming, cycling, and running. Although the AI aren't exactly challenging in most of these races, at most the threat they bring is the possibility of causing crashes and pileups on certain roads. But once you're in first place, it's almost impossible to lose the race, even with their teleport abilities. Alternatively, a later update to the single player would also add stock car races located near the bar up the northern area, adding more cars to the online showroom. Speaking of which, with over 10 years of content updates, GTA Online features a ton of racing content, which is unsurprising when the things they added the most into the game are vehicles, ranging from planes, boats, bike, RC, drift, pursuit, and regular street racing, with each game mode having its own unique charm, from the open wheel races, which adds mechanics such as tire wear and pit stops, the drift races, which completely change the physics and rules of the race, the GTA races being, well, GTA races, and even some of the goofy transform races and hot ring events for some cool bumper-to-bumper action. The races themselves can also be modified to a certain level, such as limiting everyone with stock vehicles, turning races into no contact for some clean competition, and even have some team-based co-driver action.
Medium left! Medium left! Medium left! Listen to my calls!
Unfortunately, we can't talk about online without its major issues. Let's start with its economy. Winning races rewards players depending on the amount of players in the room. With around 7 to 9 people, getting first will usually reward the winner with 20,000, but unfortunately, cars in online are overpriced and making them quite the grind to get, unless you're willing to swipe that credit card for some shark cards. It gets worse with the San Andreas Mercenaries update, where they logged the majority of cars on sale behind the paywall subscription of GTA Plus, which gets worse if you're a PC player because it's only available with the new consoles, and the game is filled to the brim with hackers and modders running around. So despite the great variety and fun this game offers, I cannot in any good conscience ever recommend wasting time in GTA Online for its racing content, even more so now that GTA 6 is right around the corner. Bully is that one Rockstar game where you play as the menace Jimmy Hopkins, and unlike the protagonists of GTA, Jimmy has no license or the bravery to drive cars, so instead vehicles in this game are defined by their availability for teenagers, from the usual bicycles and its millions of variants with different stats, which can be acquired from simply purchasing them, or by finishing the shop classes, most of which will be used for the game's primary racing content. Unlocked in Chapter 2, these races allow Jimmy to use any bike he brings, including the scooter. with rewards always ranging between $20 to $50, and just like in Lost and Damned, you have the option to smash your opponent's face while competing. Most of these races take place all around the area of Bullworth, with their different gangs to tackle as well. There's also go-kart races available, originally in the Carnival area, with 5 different races all requiring $1 for entry, and rewarding prize tickets for each victory, usable for purchasing gifts, and of course the scooter from the Carnival shop. After the 5 initial races are done, more races taking place in the city will unlock. Unfortunately, unlocking them all requires access to Chapter 5, which is quite the progression to make. The reward is worth it though, with the go-kart itself now spawning in front of the school's garage. It's certainly interesting how Rockstar tries to tackle some of these mechanics, and due to the more school-oriented theme of the game, utilizing smaller vehicles which allows them to make some more daring track designs, and it works well enough as a nice distraction and additional content. The GTA competitor featuring an undercover cop and takes place within the boundaries of Hong Kong. It's none other than Sleeping Dogs by Square Enix. While the game pretty much plays like your usual open world action game, it's got something going with its driving mechanics and of course the races. Out of the bat, there are 15 races in total for cars, bikes, and boat races, all separated into a 3-tier class system with Class A, B, and C races. Some races even take place within missions, requiring way to date certain girls and lock behind DLC. Rewards, however, are mostly just the cash and some XP. Variety-wise, there are 39 vehicles in total between all 3 classes and require purchase from the car dealership, with few notable exceptions coming from missions, like this Batmobile, and unlike the GTA games, they don't penalize you for murder in the races. Perfectly street legal, fellas. You know what they say, when you can't beat them, just kill them? This is quite literally it. And the car handling is quite alright with how weirdly grippy it is. Most of the challenge will come from dealing with the AI and Hong Kong's narrow streets, making this a perfect game to practice for the upcoming test drive Solar Crown. This one is pretty unique, as the Mafia game itself takes place in the 1930s. We're tasked to drive this old piece of legendary motor. For context, this single mission is the only thing related to racing in Mafia 1. As the story goes, we have to drive as a substitute, thanks to the driver getting injured by thugs. And with Don Salieri breathing down our necks, losing is not an option, and winning is not an easy task either, especially in the original version of the game, as the car handles as expected, old and worn out. And competition is very tough, as it should be. Being the only racing content in the game, this peaks everything else in this list for its difficulty and challenges, as everything is going against you by design. So despite having no variety, this is honestly something I genuinely find endearing in an open world racing game. It was so challenging in fact that the developers had to make it so much easier in the definitive edition of the game, which I'd argue kinda kills the charm of the original version. But since racing isn't exactly the main gameplay loop of this title, it also kinda makes sense to make this one-time distraction be something that just comes and goes for the general audience. Let's take a break from all the realism for a bit. You've probably heard of The Simpsons, the animated sitcom series which came out as far back as 1989 and became a hit in the US before eventually becoming a global sensation. And such success would bring along a number of creators willing to adapt the media into other areas. Thus, a number of video games based on the series would start cropping up as early as 1991. But for our case, we'll have to skip forwards to the year of 2003. The Simpsons Hit and Run, developed by Radical Entertainment and published by Vivendi Universal Games. The game at its best functions in a similar manner as the original Driver or GTA, with most of its main story content revolving around missions of different variety, from time-based point-to-point driving missions, item collection, tailing missions, takedown missions, and several racing missions. Distributed in 7 different chapters, each with its unique maps and different characters, alongside their own vehicle options. At around 49 cars each with its own stats and unique handling the players can acquire, traversing the areas of Springfield can get a bit interesting, with several vehicles acting as a secret to be found in each chapter. There are no customization features outside of character costumes, but with the amount of cars available, it won't be necessary. Each car has its own durability, indicated by the physical damage that occurs and the smoke that will start spewing. In case of critical damage, the best course of action is to look for the nearest repair item. This will be necessary in a lot of missions, so they are scattered around the map enough. but if the car is destroyed, it's not exactly the end of the world. There are 3 options you can do. Find a phone booth, call in vehicles, ask random pedestrians for a lift, or drive the destroyed car frame. It's not viable, but it's an option. Other things are scattered throughout the world, such as collectible cards and several sources of cash from destructible boxes, vending machines, and the angry robot wasps. These will be necessary due to progression requiring purchases of several cars and costumes. And there's one wager race in each chapter. It's not as effective as the previous sources, but it's there as an option. The story itself revolves around an alien conspiracy, a bunch of spiked soda, and a lot of funny nonsense. Most missions will be tied to this plot, but most of it is intended for them to be a simple interaction with the characters of the world. Once the story is done, you can jump between chapters to revisit old maps for any loose ends to tie up, which in this game's case also features racing side content. We'll have to hunt down the corresponding NPCs on each map, where they will provide 3 different races, and when all the races are completed, a vehicle will be unlocked for permanent use. These races utilize a lot of the map by implementing special barriers akin to what the GTA titles would do for their own race events. And thanks to the 7 maps designed as a circuit loop, some of these races can take us all around the area. Any car can be brought into these races as well, so go ahead and go ham with it. Just beware of the AI, as they are pretty challenging in these races, just like the missions themselves. Since there are no upgrade systems in place, we can either pick a faster car from the phone booth or simply mastering the course, as all 7 maps have their interesting quirks from their visual design and most importantly road placements, including the shortcuts. Although this can be a risky move during missions or free roam, since some shortcuts require destroying props, which can trigger the hit and run mechanics starting cop chases. Unlike its contemporaries, the cops in this game only stick around for at least a minute at best, but they do move fast. Getting busted costs 50 coins. Once that stacks up, it'll potentially turn the game into a grind fest. With that in mind, this is easily one of the funnest games in general, with its great use of humor and characters, but most importantly thanks to how well made the gameplay is. Almost every vehicle handles great, its racing content is superb, built to the brim with details, and the difficulty is no slouch either, even by comparison to other games on this list. Yet another open-world action game coming from the Driver franchise. Despite having the pedigree of one of the earliest driving game series, this was around the time when the franchise was confused with its goals, as the game started to devolve into having too many on-foot sections, to later having gunfights, drive-bys, and pretty much what you'd expect out of something that can be considered as a GTA competitor. And Parallel Lines would be no different, coming with a unique mechanic of era switching. Due to a critical plot element which forces a time skip from 1978 to the year of 2006, the game is distinguished by having 2 different eras of environment and vehicles. And if the massive car list is also not enough, each can be upgraded in the garage, adding several features from custom body and paint jobs, a pool of performance upgrades, nitrous boosters, bulletproof glass, and even some neon glow. Handling wise, everything but the bikes are okay. Each vehicle has its own set of stats, and unfortunately for bikes, for some reason a slight bump or even just the mere presence of a car next to TK makes him jump off the bike like a madman. The races themselves aren't really that unique. Scattered throughout the map of New York for both eras, we're pretty much just do races, beat the AI, and win some cash rewards, with some races rewarding race car variants every now and then. Although just like Sleeping Dogs, there is no penalty for using weapons in these races, so as Sun Tzu once said, if victory is out of reach, then violence is pretty neat. Speaking of violence, this game is based on the old classic movies featuring Mel Gibson about the post-apocalypse and the weird psycho-riddled universe with car-based religions, Mad Max from 2015. While 90% of the game itself revolves around the car Magnus Opus and a lot of car combat, the game also features several racing activities such as the death races, which unfortunately is not as exciting as the name suggests. Reading the name, and for those who are familiar with the rest of the game, will probably come to the conclusion that combat is going to be a major factor in these races. However, while combat is doable for the most part, this will play out like a regular race, as the AI rarely reacts to you or other opponents as well. It just devolves into whoever reaches the finish line first wins. Being a game centered around surviving the desolate wasteland using cars would bring a lot of benefit with its customization features, as the game allows players to toy around with a selection of performance, visual, offensive, and defensive parts. It just feels a bit disappointing to have a game with this kind of premise not really utilize its core features to make the racing a bit better. I feel like they should have emphasized more on the combat side to help make it stand out a lot more. Being one of the pioneers of the arcades and some early racing games, it's unsurprising we'd get to see Sega and the Yakuza series with its wacky variety of side content. So while you can play some of the Sega old racing arcade titles throughout the series cabinets, they would come up with something original every now and then. Yakuza 0, a game known highly nowadays for its gameplay, full of highs and lows, and this guy. There's no shortage of stuff to do in this game, but out of all the things this game contains, there's one thing we have to talk about. Not this, sadly not this, definitely not that, but this. Pocket Circuit. Mostly, it's a pretty simple track toy minigame where you put parts on your car and demolish any hopes and dreams these kids have in here, or in some cases, Kiryu's confidence gets demolished. It has quite a bit of championships you have to beat, and while doing them, you gain access to more parts, and by the end of it, they are so fast, if they were to fly off, they would probably leave a hole in someone's face. This also made its return in Like a Dragon Gaiden, and plays out the same as in Zero. So whenever you're done getting your ass served by Mr. Shakedown, or being stuck in a cabaret club, I would recommend you unwind a little bit with this minigame. After 5 main installments and several spin-offs, Yakuza gets a bit more driving content with taxi missions. Initially, this starts off quite chill, with Kiryu being tasked to simply drive from point A to point B around the simple city streets. Once we get access to the highway, however, the rules start to get flipped around so hard. From this point on, the taxi minigame is akin to what a Tokyo Extreme Racer would look like under the guiding hands of Sega and the Ryuga Gotoku team. Most of you are likely to have seen a lot of clips from this minigame thanks to the absurdity of its heat actions. Aside from looking goofy, these will come in clutch when the race gets very tough, especially with how absurdly difficult the AI can be with the rubber band, the random traffic with its density, and the highway layout itself. But these heat actions are pretty limited, so it's best to look for alternative options, starting with the car customization. There's no other drivable cars, so upgrades are the only thing available here to help tune out the stats between top speed, acceleration, and handling. Mix and matching each performance part always results in a different stat combination, and if it's still not enough, then maybe the simple placebo will help. We get to trick out the ride with its decal, color, and rims with some extra music changes. Unfortunately though, there's only a few layouts to help spice things up, and the amount of repeats will start to really get boring after a while. So if you're looking for a more refined racing minigame, look no further than Yakuza 7, with a brand new protagonist, new combat mechanics, and most importantly, even deeper racing content.
It's fucking Mario Kart again!
But wait, it's not just Mario Kart again, it's Mario Kart with guns. And one thing we have learned this year is that a normal game concept mixed in with guns sells a lot of copies. This does feel a little bit slow, but it has a lot more depth into it with the power slide mechanic, power-ups, and different obstacles or props scattered throughout the racetracks. And with AI being no slouch either, some level of strategy will be necessary, including how you tune your carts. It's mostly similar to the way taxi customization works in Yakuza 5, but there's a bit more options to tweak here. Unfortunately, with the recently released sequel, go-kart racing is out of the picture. There's also no Pocket Racer, but instead we have this. I guess this counts as racing content, but the main reason why I'd like to bring this one up, it's mainly due to its very apparent homage to the Crazy Taxi games. Cycle around the map as crazy as possible with a lot of stunts while collecting food items scattered throughout and try to deliver as many orders to as many customers as possible. It's fun and wacky, but also gets a bit grating for a while. But there's one other game within this franchise to top the rest with its racing content. This spin-off title takes you in the shoes of Yagami, a detective who goes around solving crimes and pulling sick moves with his skateboard. The game features multiple racing events, with the first one being the bike death races. This mode provides the thrill of challenging Japan's weird biker gangs. The task usually comes down to beating down the smaller guys before finally initiating a death race with the leader of the gang, avoiding damage and maneuvering around to inflict damage in return. In terms terms of its mechanics, however, there's not really much depth, as even the races tend to really be a railroaded highway track, but this features a ton of customization for some reason, with different bikes and each having its own set of upgrades you can toy around with. Sadly, the option to replay death races is no longer available once it's completed, so despite having some level of depth, without the option to retry the content again, everything is pretty much negated from the get-go. This weird design choice is not present for this one, however. Skateboard racing in Lost Judgment plays pretty similarly to the go-kart racing in Yakuza 7, with different power-ups, obstacles, and currency to collect. Of course, with the switch from a car to skateboards, changes in mechanics are inevitable. The removal of power slide replaced by the ability to jump, grind, and fall off when crashing into things. This does come with its benefits and pitfalls, as it allows the developers to be extra crazy with the tracks due to its smaller size, but resulting in far fewer customization options, so everything comes down to personal skill. Luckily, there's one more type of racing with lots of depth with its customization options. The drone racing minigame does have a bit more simplistic gameplay, but with its wealth of upgrades and customization, a lot of thought is required to anticipate any upcoming challenges. We get to change the frame, motor, propeller, and even a turbo for some reason. Well, when it comes down to the racing, it's probably the simplest one out of the bunch. We practically just fly around following the arrow as we progress, and fly into the power-up of choice, which usually will either be a boost or repairs, with most of the challenge coming from the AI and getting used to having to deal with the tracks alongside its verticality, and said challenge will be the major advantage here. Despite its simplicity, the difficulty itself will push any players to fully master the tracks and mechanics, so in all honesty, this is easily the best one overall, but its own small ecosystem that can really engross players into this game mode for hours on end. Over at the Ubisoft corner, we'd see some racing content coming from the Watch Dogs series. Coming from the team behind Driver San Francisco, it shouldn't be surprising that it also features racing in some fashion. Sadly though, races only exist as an online PvP activity, with events taking place around the area of Chicago, and for your rewards, 10 XP. The best feature in the race itself is the incorporation of the hacking mechanic, working similarly to the way abilities work in Split Second, allowing players to screw each other over by closing roads, manipulating the traffic and their environment, which sadly is no longer present in the sequel for its single-player portion. Watch Dogs 2 has e-kart races, and well, they didn't utilize the one thing the game is made for, and it makes these activities very bland as a result. Saints Row was once a direct competitor to GTA with its wacky, zany, and more humor-based gangster storyline. With the way Saints Row progression works, the developers get to come up with some of the more out-of-the-box activities for their missions. Luckily for us, this also means they got to toy around with way more vehicle missions and even more racing-based activities. Thus, Saints Row 2 easily contains way more racing content from its regular street races, which we get to bring our own ride to. Some bike, boat, plane, helicopter checkpoint events, with some AI races quickly becoming a chaotic demo derby event thanks to AI behavior and collision physics. Completing each race type unlocks a special vehicle from each category, and with the option of 125 vehicles and 14 as DLC offerings alongside plenty of customization features, you'd be in for some wild ride as we traverse the entire map of Stillwater, from its busy downtown areas to the northern suburban areas and anywhere near the airport down to the south. Although it's not all rainbows and sunshine, for one, all races regardless of the vehicle types are marked as racing, so you won't be able to tell which is which at first. And being a Saints Row game, the physics can be detrimental at some point, especially if we're talking about the PC port. Just Cause, the franchise primarily known for its overabundance of freedom to do some fun action as the mercenary thriller that it is. One of Square Enix's titles which would feature racing as a form of side activity. Starting with this title, Just Cause 2 would feature more checkpoint-based events with time limits with several types of vehicles such as cars and planes, taking us all around the map with off-road jungle races and several road races taking place in areas including the airport. Just like most non-racing games though, the challenge mostly stems from how weird the handling and physics are. The next game, however, didn't really change much. Aside from the new map, better graphics, and different looking cars, most of the important bits are quite intact. Races still use the checkpoint style with time limits, and the handling may actually be worse here, so I wouldn't really recommend looking for the racing content here. There's a reason why the Just Cause games tend to promote the grappling hook, wingsuit, and parachute over the regular vehicles for traversal. With many different games, genres, and developers covered, it's been a very interesting experience witnessing some of these game modes and how racing is utilized in each game. Some are noticeably made with more care than others, with their deep mechanics and more interested implementations of an enclosed ecosystem. Some feature racing as a proper option and distraction from the usual content loop without delving too deep to make the players forget what they're playing, and some just simply have it for the sake of having racing content without much care in its implementation. In the end, racing is just a very simple activity that will never be separated from it no matter how many genres there are, and it will always fall on the developers to see if these activities would be done well or not. Now I know certain games didn't make it into this video, but it's mainly because if I kept adding more and more games, this video would take forever to actually complete. So if you do know some games that I might have missed out on, feel free to write in the comments of what you think about that specific game. Other than that, thank you to all my YouTube members for supporting the channel. Drop a like and a sub if you really enjoyed the video, as it does help the channel a lot. And I'll see you lads in another video.